NGOs working towards equal, just, and inclusive societies in a sustainable world. I am Javier García del Oliva. I am the head of country engagement at ActionAid International, and I am here in my capacity of member of Concord Board. And I will have the pleasure to moderate this webinar. And I am very much looking forward to hear from these great panelists that we have here today. So as you probably know, this is not the first debate that Concord is organizing. This is the second in a series of as a part of the Concord-led campaign EU for Global Justice. You will see the logo at the back of the slide of the campaign. So the action aims to put the reduction of global inequalities firmly on the agenda of the EU institutions renewed this year. And this debate is live streamed in Zoom, but also on YouTube. So you are welcome to ask questions at any point by using the Q&A button in Zoom or by posting your comments on YouTube. We will try to look forward to select some of the questions to the speakers, and at the end of the webinar, the last part of the webinar, we will have a moment for the speakers to react to some of your questions. We will not invite you to come in live into the Zoom because technicalities are always problematic, and just to avoid risk of the connection going down, we will select those questions and share with the panelists. Okay, so let me quickly introduce this great panel. So we have starting from the top, we have Mónica Silvana González, who is member of the European Parliament within the S&D Group. Mónica is vice chair of the Delegation for Relations with Mercosur. She's member of the Committee on Development. She's also part of the delegation to the Euro-Latin American Parliamentary Assembly and the European Parliament Network on Policy Coherence for Development. In 2021, Mónica authored a report on the impacts of climate change on vulnerable populations in developing countries. And more recently, in 2023, Mónica has contributed to reports on the EU development cooperation to enhance access to education and training, and also the report EU development cooperation in support of access to energy as a shadow reporter. So I think Mónica has been a great ally of Concord during these last years, and it's great to have you here. So welcome to this webinar, Mónica. Also, we have Eric Marquardt, who is a member of the European Parliament within the Greens EFA group. Eric is the vice chair of the Committee on Development. Eric is also part of the Delegation for Relations with Masrec countries. He is member of the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs, LIBE, and he's also part of the Delegation for Relations with Afghanistan. His main areas of interest include migration, human rights, humanitarian affairs, and international partnerships. And recently, in 2023, Eric contributed to the European Parliament report on the implementation of the NDICI Global Europe as shadow reporter, which I think is very relevant for this discussion today. So welcome, Eric, to this webinar. Also, we have from the CSO side, we have Dr. Leslie Ann Foster, who is the Executive Director at Masih Manjane, Women's Rights International. Masih Manjane's mission is to eradicate gender-based violence in order to achieve a healthy, safe, secure, equal, responsible, and supportive society for all women and girls. Leslie Ann Foster work extends across 26 African countries in her capacity as president of Humanitarian Sexual Rights Network. And she's also a critic of the economic injustice experienced by the African countries as a result of the extractivism activities of the global north, and a proponent of embedding gender equality in the reform of the international financial architecture. So welcome to this webinar, Dr. Leslie Ann Foster. And last but not least, we have Robin Roels, who is the EU Raw Materials Coalition Coordinator at the European Environmental Bureau. Robin has been active in the field of resource justice, extractivism, and critical raw materials policy. Robin worked as a resource justice assistant at the European Environmental Bureau and as a volunteer at CATAPA, who is a member of the European Environmental Bureau. Robin has a degree in conflict and development studies from Ghent University, where he specialized in resource conflict and protest. Together with other civil society organizations, he writes and monitors raw materials policy and the necessity for a transition away from destructive and depleting mining practices towards systemic change. So as you can see, and appreciate we have a really great panel today. I am very much looking forward to hearing what the speakers have to share, all the knowledge, all the ideas, and I hope to have a lively discussion between these panelists. Unfortunately, I will try to be strict with the timing. So Eric, Monica, Leslie Ann, and Robin, if I have to cut you at some point, please bear in mind that we have only 1 hour. So I will try to facilitate the possibility of all the speakers to have the same level of intervention. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we will have a bit of time at the end of the section to respond some of the questions by the audience, either on YouTube or in Zoom. So let me start by framing a bit the conversation. You all know that the EU pitches itself as a key values-based partner for countries all around the world and make its international cooperation, in particular its funded partnerships, very visible. We all have attended meetings and summits about Global Gateway, and we have seen how Global Gateway is branded everywhere. So we know how the EU and the Commission is branding these international partnerships. But in addition, the EU shapes the context for partner countries' fiscal, regulatory, and economic space through, among others, its legislation, its dominant global market position, trade policies, and geopolitical influence in multilateral institutions such as the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. We are, during this campaign that is about, or is already there, in the media, we are hearing a lot about competitiveness instead of cooperation. We are hearing a lot about investment in market-oriented solutions, and we are listening less on investment in human development. We are hearing a lot about geopolitical interests and less about multilateralism. And we are listening about defense and less about peace and security. So the debate already in the media is there. So we have today the opportunity to address some of the critical questions ahead of the EU elections. One is, to what extent does the EU give and take in its partnerships with partner countries? And how do its actions contribute, and sometimes we will see that not, to sustainable development and inequality reduction? But let's hear from our speakers, and I hope you can enjoy the debate. I will invite first Dr. Foster, Leslie Ann, if you can tell us a bit about the negative impacts of the EU policies and actions of the EU in partner countries in the Global South, and also if you can tell us a bit which policies are undermining the European efforts to achieve the 2030 agenda globally. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Javier, and good day to everyone. It's a great pleasure to be able to contribute to this debate. I want to start by saying that South Africa has enjoyed financial support from many European countries, both through our apartheid struggle and now through the start of the Still a New Democracy. We were supported a lot to get the fundamentals of democracy and human rights into our society. But what we are experiencing now and what we see in other African countries, the work on development is backtracking. And all the hard-won gains that we've had, particularly around human rights principles and values, those are moving backwards rather than forward. We see a shift to the right, with nationalist right-wing policies becoming the norm. And we are witnessing a breakdown of the multilateral systems and systems that contributed to justice and peace across the continent. Most recently, the war by Russia on Ukraine had a very hard reverberating impact on countries in the South, and particularly in Africa. Food and energy shortages were the most notable. The war raised the most humanitarian aid of any crisis in the modern times, but all of that aid was kept in Europe and to deal with European refugees fleeing the war. This is what we were told. The response by European countries was swift and very much singularly focused on internal challenges. Many of us in the South had our support cut off, and we were left in a sink or swim situation. What we've seen in this policy is, because of the reduction of the ODA budgets, which was almost immediate, we've had less access to development support. As I said, food insecurity, water source shortages, energy shortages, climate change, natural disasters, all became issues that we had to deal with internally, which was very, very disturbing. And this has led to a rise in poverty levels. Gender-based violence is spreading, and girls are being subjected to archaic practices that put them at risk of school dropouts, pregnancies, and forced marriages. The maternal deaths and child pregnancies are spiking across every country, and it's a real threat to the development of girls, and puts them into a cycle of poverty that's very difficult to come out of. Economic inequality persists because educational programs are not accessible to communities. And so we're seeing that the poverty levels are deepening. Nothing has made inequality more visible as the situation in Ukraine, as opposed to the one in Palestine, where we don't see the humanitarian aid at the same levels. And race has played a very important role in all of this. So we have seen the politics playing out and contributing to inequality and the abuse of human rights and injustice on the geopolitical level. But the impact is felt at the local level by ordinary people who have no idea how their lives are being impacted by these global role players. I'm part of a global alliance of organizations from the South who have a campaign addressing inequality stemming from the international financial architecture, the Bretton Woods institutions and so forth that you have mentioned. And they purport to commit to eradicating poverty and inequality, using the implementation of the SDG agenda as the currency that they're working with. But it is a capitalist system, and capitalism is not about equality. It's not an exchange system. It is about inequality. And what we're seeing is the reality is so that the policies of these institutions are deeply unjust and deepening inequality. African countries in particular are being pushed deeper into poverty by the unfair debt system, with unfair and unjust taxation rates, repayment rates, which are usually in currencies of the dollars or euros, which are way, way above what our currencies are worth. And this is a big problem that we are facing. Our countries are robbed of our very valuable natural resources, where very measly rates are paid with the real value gets added after they leave the country. We all know this. The extractive industries have perfected the art of demanding tax holidays that benefit themselves, leaving the communities from which these resources are taken in absolute poverty. I always say that Africa is said to be a poor continent, but it is in actual fact one of the richest continents in the world because of all the natural resources that it has. But our economies do not belong to us. All the mines, everything we have, are owned by countries, mainly in the West, and many of them are European countries. We are also now plagued with the private sector being critical players now, dominating the geopolitical space. They are feared by countries because they often have greater resources than these countries have, and when we are unable to repay the loans on the terms that the private sector puts on us, the World Bank or IMF, we are forced to restructure our budgets, and austerity measures are put in place. What we've seen in South Africa is, in this year alone, our budgets on education and healthcare have been massively cut because of the debt repayment. So the brunt of the austerity measures are borne by the poor, and mainly by women and children. In South Africa, we've had these massive cuts, and we have 55 million people who depend on state healthcare, and there's no thought of how we will address this. So also youth have no chance at a decent education or a job. So poverty is largely the result of this unfair and unjust global architecture, and the reform and transformation of the system is the only way in which sustainable development will be achieved. But sustainable development in the South is seen by us as a smoke and screens and mirrors issue, where the real issues that have to be dealt with are not actually supported and they're not funded. So sustainable development is not going to be achievable for us, and poverty eradication by 2030 is not going to happen. So European countries need to reinforce their commitment to upholding a just system that benefits all. We want to see our economies meet the human needs of the people, and that they meet them at high standards. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie-Ann, for outlining very clearly what's going on in South Africa and what's the role of the EU playing and the EU stakeholders in your country, either through the European Union or the private sector. It's also concerning to hear what are the how the human rights has advanced in somehow to some extent,
Yes.
and at the same time how the EU is also supporting the global architecture that is putting austerity at the forefront of the policies in your country and undermining education and health, among others. So let me go now ask Robin to react also to this question about the impacts of EU policies in the global south and how it's affecting right now.
Yes, thank you, Javier, and also thank you, Dr. Foster. I think you already highlighted a lot of the issues that also come back specifically within the policy field in which we're operating on, the extractives and the raw materials. So what we've seen there actually in the past years is really kind of a discrepancy, a disconnect between issues around like the European Green Deal and the policy around that, and of course sustainable development and more global cooperation with industrial policy, which is both internally and externally. So it's been about a year and a month now that we've had the launch of the Critical Raw Materials Act, which was an initiative by DG GROW to kind of look for solutions for the provision of raw materials within the European Union. So critical raw materials under the raw materials strategy, which are being used both for the green transition, but also for digital transition, but also for the defense industry, weaponry, and space exploration, although it's often framed mostly around, of course, questions around the green transition. And this disconnect actually has caused a lot of issues, we believe, both internally as well with the strategic projects, but also on an external dimension with strategic partnerships, where the EU is trying to provide raw materials by diversifying away from single players which are dominating the market and which are causing disruptions in the supply and in the prices of raw materials that we need for the green transition. This move is to some extent important. But we see a lot of issues when it comes to indeed how are they looking at the financing and what are the ways that they are going about this in a transparent way. So there's a lot of issues in terms of the transparency. We've seen by now already 12 strategic partnerships with a diverse range of countries across the globe to work together for the provisioning of strategic raw materials or critical raw materials. And the two terms are a bit different, but to provide for the green transition. But the issue there is really the lack of kind of civil society participation and involvement of the wider public within the debate of how these should be forged. Often we get an announcement that there is the process of a new memorandum of understanding, or that there has been one agreed, but then we don't get to see it. And often this, when we then get to see it, we often don't also get sufficiently into the details of the roadmaps on how they will go about these. And this really risks limiting the debate about how these how these partnerships should be forged in collaboration with the governments, but of course also the industries that we're talking about. So of course the extractive industry, the mining itself, but also the processing, the refining, up the value chain. It's often not clear what the specific characteristics are and how the people are also being heard in terms of how can this actually create benefit. And the question there is indeed, if you look at this new legislation, there's a lot of talk also about added value and benefit sharing, but these are terms that are not really translated into specific proposals on how to go about it. And to some extent, they are susceptible to being discussed within specific contexts with specific countries. But then it's also important that we as civil society are being involved within this discussion. And this lack of transparency really makes it a lot harder. And then there is the issue of the financing. So where has been not entirely clear under the Critical Raw Materials Act how this move to diversify away from a single player to domestic production, but also domestic recycling and other targets, and diversifying our supplies of raw materials, how this is translated into also concrete financial action. There is a clear need for it because with the lack of particular financing and clear objectives and clear expectations towards these sectors, What we see now is that a lot of players within the political field have mostly been pushing actually for simplification of the process, for streamlining, mostly also in the light of cutting down the time it takes to open these projects, because often they take 10 to 15 years. And looking at our Green Deal objectives, but also, as I mentioned, it's not just about that, it's also about other sectors. They really want to cut this down, but we really believe that actually the issue is with the financing for actually building more capacity to effectively do environmental impact assessments, to go and talk with the local communities and the people on the ground, to hear their concerns. And then when consent is being reached, or if consent is being reached, with the local civil society, with the population on the ground, then to really implement these projects to the best available standards, which is also a very big challenge, not also in Europe, but particularly in third countries, which have a lot of resources, that they are still very prone to keep choosing the most cost-effective ways of doing their operation because of a lack of funding or a lack of initial funds to start up their projects, which causes a lot of issues. And in terms of course, the underground effects of extraction, such as water contamination, soil pollution, health risks to local communities, but also things like the tailings and the risks that they bring with them. So for us, it's really about, okay, where are we're going to see this funding come from, and then how is it allocated? How is it allocated in a way that it actually also addresses the needs of these third countries to find added value and benefits within these projects. And this also means that the EU should invest in helping these countries move up the supply chain, rather than trying to appropriate these resources for themselves in an unprocessed state. Because a lot of the value from materials is being created higher up the value chain, not in the primary extraction. And this is a real challenge. And there are a lot of countries actually pushing for this themselves. And then we see kind of a bit of split approach by the EU, where on one hand, they commit under these strategic partnerships and under the Global Gateway to work towards sustainable strategic like a sustainable way for strategic projects, but then they also kind of scold countries that are taking action themselves to move higher up the supply chain. I think some of the issues there. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Robin, for putting the focus on the communities and the people which are affected by those projects, and also to raising the issue about transparency, because sometimes we are lacking those transparency about what are the EU operations elsewhere, and CSOs are not involved from the communities also, but also from the national, also the European organizations haven't been involved in some of these initiatives. So let's hear now from Monica from the European Parliament. So maybe Monica can tell us a bit from the PCSD perspective on your experience around the impacts of the EU policies. Monica, over to you.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you, all the team from Concord. Wait a second. Okay. First of all, I would like to thank all the team from Concord for the invitation. I would like to respond to the question focusing on the policy coherence for the development, which I believe this is only way to control the impact of the EU policies on developing countries and ensure our action are helping them to advance in the achievement of the SDGs. To reflect the importance of applying policy coherence in EU developing action, I will discuss about three aspects. The first, deforestation. The second, the export of raw material to the EU. And the third, the promotion of legal migration pathway to the EU. The first, about deforestation. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the EU has been trying to find a new avenues of natural resources. We are promoting several instruments and new regulations that have an impact of developing countries, often country affecting, but this new regulation complain that the EU taking a unilateral decision without consulting them. The regulation on deforestation, which affected that date on January 2025, had strong opposition in many third countries. The last year, 17 ambassadors to the European Union from the different countries signed a letter to express their concern about the enter into the force of the new deforestation regulation. In it, the ambassador complaining that the legislation did not take into account local circumstances and capacities, and that increasing poverty among small producers. They therefore call it the letter for the EU to provide a longer adaptation period and above all to insist these producers. I think this regulation is very important for us, and it is following that the civil society and environmentalists have been fighting for a very long time. However, with only 24 months for small company to develop an traceability system, a question arises if the EU can put in place sufficient accompanying measures for small producers in third countries or not. When we talk with our interlocutor in Latin America and Caribbean, they express their desire to promote the exportation to the EU of products produced by local and sustainable communities, putting in value traditional indigenous knowledges. EU development cooperation has been a tool to bring assistance to these small producers so they can adapt to the change of roles. With constant dialogue with first countries stakeholders, we can help this country fight deforestation through, for example, a technology transfer by creating capacity building for disaster and climate risk. No? For the second issue, the critical raw material, I think Europe must not repeat all colonial mistakes, such as extractivism. The EU is multiplying its trade agreement with developing countries, especially in raw material. In Latin America, we find countries with in lithium, such as Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. They so-called the lithium triangle, where Russia and China are already present too. The Global Gateway in Bolivia aims to explore the potential for investment in lithium together with the EU. Recently, representative of DG IMPA from the Commission met with the Minister of Hydrocarbon and Energy to explore the future of a relation with the region with respect to raw material. However, question arise on the impact of this new global gateway investment can have in the region. The process of extraction of lithium, as you know, needs an enormous amount of water, and the chemical required are toxic. Local indigenous communities that live close to the extraction field have been protected against them. This poses question about the impact of the Global Gateway project on the lithium. It is not clear if the Commission has done enough impact assessment of this new project and how they will serve it to achievement of the SDGs in the region. In addition, the question of the free, prior, and informed consent, which is always questioned by the white forces, I think is the essential aspect here, no? The free, prior, and informed consent. EU should give attention to the situation of indigenous communities, which are disproportionately affected by poverty and live in areas in danger by current and future projects of raw material extraction. I hope that the new diligence directive that will vote on in the last plenary of the mandate, the next week, will be a step in the right direction and end to the extractivism. And to finish, I would like to tell you about the talent pool. To tell you, recently I have worked for a proposal of the EU talent pool as a S&D shadow. It has been interesting to work on this subject because my team and I think it is very good example when we talk about the policy coherence for development. I hope this new tool will be useful and really provide opportunity for job seekers. However, during my time working, our time working on the file, I have been skeptic about its possible impact of third countries, mainly in brain drain, in car drain phenomenon. In analyzing of the impact of is not clear. No, we push to include mention in the aspect of brain drain impact on the first country. Once again, the right part of this parliament, the right was against. In the European consent, the development, the EU and its member state reaffirm the commitment on to PCD, starting very clearly the necessary of taking into account the objective of developing cooperation in policy, which are likely to affect developing policy. If we want to put in place a migration pact, that's a work for the EU, we must do all the possible to ensure that is does not affect negatively developing countries. Sorry for extend. Apologize for extend 1 minute plus, and I promise to be brief in the second issue, in the second ask. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Monica. I think there is a lot of alignment between what you have already shared and Robin and Leslie and before. But let's talk about resources. And I think that for that, Eric can help us a bit. So we would like to know about the ODA that the EU is delivering. How much of these EU development assistance actually supports sustainable development and inequality reduction, and how much it does it serve to the EU domestic interest? No? So Eric, maybe you can tell us a bit about that.
Yes, thanks a lot. And also thank you for the invitation. I think we already heard a lot, and I will try to keep it short that we have enough time for the second round and even some questions. As you know, the EU and its member states are collectively the biggest donor worldwide for development aid, but that's just a number in the end. And what we see is that we have some worrying developments, many challenges. You can also call the challenges problems. From my perspective and our perspective, I think this shift to how funding is being used for geopolitical interest, you can talk about global gate, but also about different other topics. That's very worrying. And I think it's also hard to see that, of course, the spending target for ODA is important on the one hand, but you also have to understand if everything which is labeled as a part of the ODA target is in the end sustainable development. When we talk about the NDICI budget, I think it's very worrying for me that we see already that the migration spending target is exceeded, and we as a parliament do not have really the power or scrutiny to keep the Commission accountable to just spend 10% as negotiated on the migration spending target in 22. It was already 14%, and I think we will even see a further increase. And what we also see is that in most of the projects, we have a lack of safeguards on human rights and environmental and social impact assessments and stuff. And I can just say that we also see a lack of involvement of CSO and NGOs. And if I see the debates in the European Parliament, sometimes it's kind of if you are in favor of CSO and NGOs or against NGOs, and it's like a soccer game where people should understand that civil society is not just another team, it's just the practitioners who know how it works on the ground. And I find really worrying that there is no like common understanding in democratic parties of the importance of CSO and NGOs. And I also like that's not a we can maybe have some more positive thoughts in the next round. But I also see that with a new common European asylum system, it will have impacts also on like our like external dimension. If we have a solidarity pool, like a mandatory solidarity system, which will be created, where member states can just label external action as a part of the solidarity inside the common European asylum system, it will increase the shift to migration spending in the external dimension. And I think that's very worrying. Monica already talked important, but also a lot about the policy Koreans for development. And you all know the European Parliament resolution, but that I think it's important that we have this resolution, but the most important question is how we solve the problems in the end. Like we know about the insufficient implementation, lack of coordination, lack of technical accountability, lack of regular reporting and transparency. And we also know that it's very hard to make the Commission doing impact assessments when they create a new project somewhere. But how to change that, that's I think the question for the second round. And I'm interested also in hearing some of your thoughts about it.
Thanks a lot, Eric, for this first reaction. I think you have outlined some of the trends that Concord has been, following, which is this use of ODA for other goals, different than what is expected, and the growing use of these resources for migration spending targets over what is in the current legislation. And also we have been also claiming that the lack of involvement of CSO in the ODA of the EU it's a growing and concerning trend, because I think we have a great added value to add to those initiatives. So let's look to the future. We have now a very clear landscape of what's going on, how is the impact of the EU policies. Also, we have the perspective of the figures from the ODA that Eric already shared. So let's look at the future. So Monica, I will go over to you first to hear from you. So what can we expect from this new European election? What the EU can do effectively to support sustainable development politically and financially in this next European election? So, but please bring us some hope, because the landscape is not very positive at this moment.
Thank you, Javier. I promise to be brief. I think the first urgence is the member state need to step up their funding to ODA, official operation development assistance, and we need to put in place effective monitoring and control mechanism. European solidarity is now on only a few member states, and this cannot continue. It's a question of political will. An amazing example is Spain. In 2013, Spain was only given 0.15 of its gross national income to ODA. The previous president affirmed that giving 0.7% to ODA was impossible for Spain. Unfortunately, last year, our president, Pedro Sanchez, with support of all civil society, approved a new law increasing to 0.7% for amount of gross national income to 2030. Another important point would be to find alternative and innovative ways to finance ODA. One possibility is the use of special drawing rights that can be recycled through multilateral development bank. This is something that has already been raised by different developing countries and regions, such as the Economic Commission for Africa. For the EU, it will be necessary to change the position of the Central European Bank. And other issue is on the Commission side. It should systematically provide critical, in-depth and independent assessment on each proposed policies for external action, paying special attention in the impact of the partner countries and from the PCD perspective. The Commission has on obligation on guarantee PCD, rooting on the Article 208 of the Lisbon Treaty. Therefore, future EU policy should go through systematic screening to ensure that they are aligned with the achievement of the SDGs in the third countries. And to ensure that, I believe it is also necessary to increase the contact with the third country stakeholder and civil society on the ground. When we talk with them, they always insist that EU development projects do not consistently consent with the civil society on the ground. They need to be present not only in the analysis of the impact of EU policies and programming, they insist to be present in the select and the implementation of projects. I believe civil society has also a big role to play in ensuring the engagement of the decision maker. The future of this European Parliament is uncertain, and the majority we have nowadays maintained, with more presence of the conservative and right-wing MEPs. It is your role to continue on the conversation with them, to continue on and refine your advocacy work to ensure that the next parliament continue to be an ally in the defending sustainable and human EU development cooperation. I call all citizens, all EU citizens to participate in the election the next June and vote in progressive force to defend our balance, to defend a strong EU development cooperation. I think it's urgent defend the development cooperation. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry, I apologize for extend a few seconds more.
Thanks, Monica. So over to you, Eric. What to expect now? Bring us some hope. We know what is coming. We also read the media, but what we can expect from this new setup of the European Parliament. No?
Yes, first of all, I think that many people expect that more people like, I don't know, right-wing populists and right-wing people will be in the parliament next term. It's not that yet because we have elections and we will see. But if there are more right-wing people in the parliament, that does not mean that the parliament has to take more right-wing decisions. And I am also a little bit disturbed by some conservative MEPs to say, yeah, we now have to take decisions, and maybe it's not the best decision, but now we have to take it because in a few months the parliament will be more right, and then we have to take even worse decisions, while it's a conservative group in the parliament who decides if they have an alliance with right-wing populism people or with us, for example. So it's their decision if the parliament is maybe a little bit more right or left. And they can take the decision. And I think the most important thing also for civil society is to make conservatives understand that populism will not bring solutions in the end. and we need solutions. And I also think that sometimes politicians, and maybe an increasing number of politicians, has the impression that values are somehow a weakness. I don't think so. I think that history showed us that values are not a weakness, but something which makes us strong. And I also think that if we talk about European interests, there is a misunderstanding of European interests. I think values are in our interests. And I think our policy, Koreans for Development, for example, should be in line with, of course, our values. And I hope, and I really have the hope, I would say that the next term will bring us more possibilities to convince more people, because they will see that the far right, but also the shift to the right from conservative parties, will not even bring them like one more solution. It's just like easy answers to really complicated problems and challenges, and will not bring solutions. I think that it's really interesting. Like, that was more broad overview and answer, but maybe we have a minute also for some questions and answers. I think that, like, to improve PCD is important, and it's also important to increase the transparency, and maybe we can increase the pressure to have more impact assessments from the Commission. And maybe it's also easier when there is not a pandemic to see the impact of the project of the European Union with your own eyes as an MEP. And maybe that's also important also for the DEVE community. That's like there are certain things which can be better in the next term, of course. But in general, it is a question of the political will of the European Commission and its member states, if they want to have good solutions, which are focused not only on some short-term effects, but on long-term development. And that's in the end also a geopolitical question, I think. If like European values sustain or not. And that is, I think, the most important question for the next term. And of course, the next term is also the term, like it ends in 2029, where we have to really make people understand that they're, like, even if we do not reach the sustainable development goals by 2030, that we need something after the SDGs, and that is also something we should work on in the next term. And maybe we are more successful than last time, hopefully.
We all hope that, Eric. Thanks for your intervention. So let's hear now from the CSO colleagues. Maybe we can start with Leslie-Ann, if you can react to what you have heard, and what do you expect from this new EU setup? I mean, what we can expect to really advance on the achievement of the SDGs, really advance on addressing inequalities, reducing poverty. What do we expect from the new European Union institutions? Sorry, Leslie-Ann, you have to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry about that. I'm just saying that from where we're sitting, we are very worried about the next elections and about whether it's going to go, right-wing, to a greater degree, because that will really determine, the trajectory of the policies moving forward. Our hope is that there will be that, sense will prevail, and that we will see a greater commitment to addressing the needs of the South in particular. And then I think that, that at the moment there seems to be a very big split in terms of the attention on the South, and that there's a withdrawal of support for the work in the South. So that's our concern, is whether there will be continued support, after these elections. So we're watching these elections very carefully. We're also having elections across Africa at the moment, which of course is very important to us about who actually comes into power. But we remain hopeful that sanity will prevail, and that we will see support for the Sustainable Development Goal agenda and the development agenda as a whole. We are worried about the rise in militarization. It's taken hold not just in Europe, but in the Middle East and in South Africa, and all of that will have an impact on the development agenda. It's already having that in terms of budgets being more spend, a greater spend on that. And also the fact that we are so fragile at the moment as a global community, that we are seeing these crises, developing, particularly in the Middle East. I mean, that's a very big concern for us, but also in Africa. There's no peace, there's no security across many, many countries. And we feel that the disconnect is that a lot of the arms, the military apparel is provided by European countries. And there's a lack of willingness to pull back on that. That's a very big concern to us. So I think there's a need to redefine the development agenda within this SDG platform, but also to look very closely at whether we are going to meet the goals, of reducing poverty and inequality in the next few years. It doesn't feel, I'm sorry, Javier, I know you're saying let's be positive, but it doesn't feel as though we are moving in that direction for those of us in the South. Thank you.
Leslie Ann, yeah, we are still on time to reverse the trends. The election didn't happen yet. It's 6th to 10th in June. So let's wait for the best. Robin, over to you. Give us some hope. What we can expect from this EU new setup in terms of SDG inequalities? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to say that I really want to concur a lot with what Dr. Foster was saying earlier. I mean, also with the coalition and within the civil society, environmental civil society, we're also quite concerned about the upcoming elections. And I think, for example, when it comes to like the question also around militarization, this is really an issue on multiple levels indeed. Like when it comes, for example, to what I've been talking about, also the raw materials. I mean, again, it's a big sector also where these are being appropriated, and the EU and the Commission does not really make a distinction which materials would be used for. So it's trying to sell this to the wider public and also to the Parliament, the Council, etc., as being very much a prerequisite for the green transition. But then it's also appropriating this policy actually for raw materials for these kind of militarization, weaponry, and defense industry objectives. So this is really something that should also be tackled. And one of the things that a lot of civil society organizations that have been working on extractive industries have been pushing for is more transparency, again, with a different kind maybe, of supply chains, of where are materials going and what are they being used for. And I think this is really an opportunity on a more technical level for policymakers, for civil society to make a difference. If we have a strong product passport and transparency along the supply chain, we can kind of address this more effectively, because now I feel like a lot of civil society and also policymakers are feeling a bit stuck with this question around militarization, and of course, due to the given context with the war in Ukraine. Then maybe just hopping towards the financing part, which was mentioned earlier. I think it's also very important to think a bit about in terms of like, okay, how are being funds derived for crises that are occurring, and we've had many of them in the past years. And there is, a substantial possibility that there will be new challenges on the horizon, is really addressing the fact that we cannot just siphon off funds from things that are essential and prerequisites actually to securing stability and peace and cooperation within the European Union, and also with our global partners, in a way to mitigate these crises, because then we're actually kind of undermining the things that are holding us from ending up with these crises anyway. So really looking at how can we push policymakers to provide additional funds when these events occur, rather than moving around money, not just also indeed, of course, with the ODA and in third countries, but also for civil society. I think it's very important that we don't see kind of more like shock doctrine kind of approaches to saying, okay, well, we have to move money around because this is now occurring, while taking away some of the essential operational work that civil society is doing, that we are doing in collaboration with third countries, is quite important. And Mr. MEP Gonzalez also made the point indeed about the lithium triangle. I think it's very important. It's also something that we've been looking at a lot. We've been pushing very hard with our Coalition for Free, Prior and Informed Consent to be included in the Critical Raw Materials Act, which unfortunately at the last minute did not make it in. But I think the takeaway there is that indeed it's not only about the consent of the local population, but also what are the environmental impacts, and the quantity of resources really plays a role there. And I think the EU should be way more proactive and way more progressive in pushing for demand-side solutions for the technologies that we want to implement to decarbonize, but again, also for other industries, in order to be able to do more with less, so that we can mitigate our impact in other parts of the world, in our bid to overcome climate change, but also to secure on a global level the fairness and equality in terms of moving away from fossil fuels. Because if we, in an unsustainable way, meaning by excessive consumption of raw materials, by putting everyone in an electric vehicle, for example, appropriate these resources, we really risk making the transition unaffordable for a lot of the third countries, which also need to decarbonize. Otherwise, it just defeats the purpose. And so seeing these demand-side solutions, raw material sufficiency, and also concrete reduction targets for specific raw materials with high level environmental and social impacts really has to play a major role in this.
Thanks a lot, Robin, for your points on also mentioning the phasing out of fossil fuels, which I think is very much needed in the next period. So let's go over, we have still a bit of time, let's go over some of the questions that the audience has shared with us. So the first one goes to Eric. So Eric, you mentioned a bit the PCSD, and the question is, you are totally right, how to move from raising awareness about PCSD shortcomings in policy-making processes to concrete action. What is needed for that, in your opinion? And what could be Concord and partner roles in that challenge about pushing this PCSD agenda in the next legislative process? So over to you, Eric.
I think so. On the one hand, at the moment, the Parliament wants a stronger role and is not able to have it. But I think in the upcoming term, it's also important that when, after the elections, and when it's clear who is part of the DEVE committee, but also maybe who is part of the AFET committee and other committees, the MEPs should be aware about PCSD. And I think that's a role for the civil society to really try to approach everybody to make PCSD agenda also visible for the MEPs who are maybe also newly elected or having a new role in a new committee. I think that's very important, but also to make the impact of the European Union projects more visible in general. I think that most of the people who are outside of the development committee, they do not see the impact of the policy of the European Union in their daily life. It's very far away. And it's very easy to find reports from the European Commission that everything is fine. And of course, we are working on increasing the effectiveness and efficiency of everything and blah, blah, blah. You it's easy to read it and to have the impression that everything works well. But to really try to not only talking in the development bubble about the challenges, but also to make it visible to all the other members of the European Parliament would help, I think, us also to have a stronger role in the Parliament.
Thanks a lot, Eric. So one question to Dr. Leslie Ann. So we have heard a lot about the challenges and the risk, but what are the opportunities? What are the opportunities from CSO, from the Global South, with these next EU elections, in terms of how the EU can really advance the SDG agenda, addressing inequalities and poverty? What do you think are opportunities for us in this context?
And I think the opportunities are to recommit to addressing, you know, the inequality and poverty. What I think earlier on, Robin spoke about that diverting of funds, you know, and I think one of the issues is, first of all, to recommit to the actual agendas of reducing poverty and inequality, and then to really back it up with funding. That's important. And there is an opportunity because the European Union has and the European Commission and all of its missions in various countries have always had a positive impact on development through what they're doing. So I would call for that recommitment. I think that that's a very important thing. And then also I mean, earlier on, Monica mentioned that there was a commitment to at least give out 0.07, you know, percent to overseas development aid, and that's reducing. It's actually stayed in Europe rather than going to the countries which they are supporting. So I think there's a very big need to look at the impact they have had and to build on that impact. That is the opportunity in the future. And to recommit, as I said, both to the agenda, but also to funding the actual platform of the SDGs that we've spoken about. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. And Robin, in terms of opportunities, how do you see the opportunities for this new setup? You have mentioned some key priorities, but from your perspective and also your experience on critical raw materials, and this new legislation coming with the CSDD, with the Critical Act on raw materials, what are the opportunities for the next period for CSO?
Yes, indeed. Emma mostly mentioned now the Critical Raw Materials Act, but there's of course also the CSDDD. Hopefully, we'll have good news soon, and with the battery regulation as well, for example, now also in the further stage. I think there's a lot of opportunities still, even though maybe some of the primary setup of the legislation hasn't been ideal, but in terms of the implementation to work really on, okay, how are these strategic partnerships and these strategic projects being held? And then when it comes to the lack of transparency, we will do, of course, our best to push and to see, because a lot of, I mean, we have a coalition of 55 members that are ready and eager to give input to these strategic projects. But as long as we don't get the information, we're kind of left waiting a bit. But we will be following up, and once we receive more details, we will be actually kind of functioning as a way to establish contact with civil society in those third countries, with communities on the ground, to hear what the situation is like for them, what their perspectives are, and to kind of build that bridge where it might be lacking a bit more on an institutional level, in order to get like a full picture and to kind of do the right messaging and really incorporate what their concerns are into the debate and bring it to Brussels, indeed, where sometimes this is a distance which is kind of harder to bridge. So I think that will be our main focus with these strategic projects, with these strategic partnerships, to find out what are some of the concerns and what do we want to see, for example, in these roadmaps to do things differently. And then, of course, the financing, and related to that, these questions around added value, these commitments, benefit sharing, and of course living up to the values of the Global Gateway in terms of democracy, in terms of accomplishing the European Green Deal, and having fair and equal partnerships also being a very important one when we're talking about extractive industries and raw materials, will be the main priority there. So we're really looking forward to working more on that. We see nevertheless, of course, a level of caution. We see some positive language within the Critical Raw Materials Act around these criteria, and we will be pushing with civil society and bridging this communication gap in the future.
Thanks, Robin, for that. And then I think this is the last question, if I am not wrong, for Eric. So thanks for your points on the importance of civil society. Do you think civil society should message in different ways than it does today to be effective in ensuring we don't lose focus on our SDG and humanitarian principle commitments? It seems like we see the problems the same way as you, but we worry about to be heard taken seriously. So this is very are very rightly questioned in this moment in terms of get our message through, no?
Yeah, but we as politicians, we have the same challenge, I would say. It's also not that easy for us to just make our opinion heard in like all of our member states and stuff. So I think civil society has a little bit the same challenges where you can talk like hours about. Maybe it's a nice workshop to see like what works well and what doesn't work well from communication point of civil society, but also civil society networks. I think, of course, social media is a much more important thing than it was 5 years ago. And it will be also more important. It's a challenge, but also maybe an opportunity to not like be dependent on like media and stuff. You can spread your message to like millions of people in the world. But of course, you have to invest in it also and find the right way to communicate in like a competition with like many young people creating great content all day. And so social media is a challenge, but also an opportunity. And I think civil society can do much more. There are not so many like, really good civil society organizations are really good in social media. And on the other hand, I think that communication-wise, as I said before, I think it's like, and that's also what I learned, like it's on the one hand important to talk to the people in the development committee because they are somehow responsible in the parliament, but to really have an impact from the development part, you need to talk to all the others too somehow. And I think that's maybe worth a try to like see how to find more allies in the other committees when it comes to European Parliament. Maybe also on the European Commission. It's also, I think, very important if you talk about coherence to like talk to all the others too. And I think there is maybe a lack of capacity. I totally understand, but I think if you ask me what should you do and what can you do better, that's maybe part of it.
Thanks, Eric. So I've just received one more question. This is for Monica. So Monica, there is a question related to the alternative way of funding development. So some colleagues were asking for clarification which alternative source of funding were there. I think it was the special drawing rights, if I'm not wrong, but maybe you can clarify.
Yes, Javier, thank you. I mentioned it to the use of the special drawing rights, is there, and it's recycling through multilateral development funds. It is an instrument that has been widely studied in academia and university and by civil society, but we need political will to put in the practice and use it. There is already example of country that are using that are using it, no, like Alemania, Belgica, and now in Spain. The Pedro Sanchez said a lot. Is need use the special drawing rights.
Okay, thanks a lot, Monica, for that. So I think we are.
Sorry, Javier. In the chat, other person asked about the PCD network in the next Monday. If you want to answer, but
yeah, go ahead.
I don't know. Will be the next Monday. I think the PCD, the humanitarian aid, the education are the standing rapporteur. It's possible in the next Monday there will a special rapporteur or PCD too. But I don't know now. It's the decision of the new MEPs, no?
Thanks a lot, Monica. So, colleagues, unfortunately, we are running out of time, and I think we have to try to close this debate. I will read again the title of this session, which is Putting Your Money Where Your Mouth Is, which is very relevant to what we have discussed today. We have seen the impacts of the EU policies and also the impacts of the EU official development assistance, and we have already listened from the panelists what are the inconsistencies in that action. We have also listened a lot of ideas about what we need to do differently in the next EU setup. So first, I would say we need to put again inequalities at the center of our action. We need to improve our transparency in our engagement with the third parties. We need to be aware of the impacts of our policies and put at the center the objectives of reducing inequality and poverty. And we expect a new legislative setup that is more enabled of these actions and try to address inequalities in a more bold way. And also we expect that transparency and the role of the CSO is very well valued in this new EU setup process. This is not the last conversation. This is not the last debate. I think that you are aware that Concord is launching this EU for Global Justice campaign. There will be an upcoming event, I think it's in 1 month, if I am correct, is the 16th of May. There will be another debate focused on foreign policy. So I hope you have enjoyed this lively debate. I would like to thank you first, the panelists, for making the time to join today, and also the audience to join this debate. And we hope to see you again the 16th of May for the foreign policy debate. Thanks a lot.
Thank you a lot. Bye.